Baltimore Ravens, you're on the clock. Welcome back to this 2025 team mock draft. This time we're going all 7 rounds with the Baltimore Ravens. First, we'll look at the team as it stands today. I'll give you some of my ideas and thoughts on what I think their top needs are. Then we'll get right to it. The mock draft. We're going to grab every single one of their picks, see what we can do. Post your comments below. And as always, I definitely appreciate the likes, the subs. Let's get to it. All right, so we're starting with looking over this depth chart. They're right there. They've been so close to the Super Bowl. They're almost seemingly in contention every year. And it starts at the top with Lamar Jackson, elite player. I think he can get them a Super Bowl title. I think we are so close that we just need to keep adding best player available in the draft and help build on this roster. I like all 3 of their running backs. Derrick Henry obviously continues to play at a high level. We know at some point here soon the wheels are going to fall off, but I think you're going to see him as their RB1 again for another year. Do they bring in another guy of his kind of caliber? I know you can't necessarily do that per se, but do they bring in another running back that could potentially be that number 1 in the future? Because Justice Hill is a great role player, and so is Keaton Mitchell, but I don't think they have that Derrick Henry mold of RB1, kind of prototype RB1 role that Derrick Henry plays. I think they're key pieces and depth guys that you want on this roster, but I don't think they can handle the load like Derrick Henry can. And then when you look at receiver, DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a Hall of Famer. Bateman and Flowers have continued to develop and look really good. But after that, we've got depth, right? We've got guys that I think you could bring in some depth receivers and push these guys at Wallace and Walker and Miller and, and any of these guys. I think you continue to look for wide receiver depth. Luckily enough, they don't need a number 1 starting wide out. They've got plenty of wide outs. They just need some depth there. Tight end. I know Mark Andrews had a tough time in the playoffs, but he's been a really high-level tight end for a while now. Isaiah Likely and Kolar, I think, are very good depth pieces, and I think Likely is going to continue to push for more snaps as we move forward. So do they look to bring in a tight end that maybe could get rid of or push Mark Andrews down the road? Maybe. I guess it just depends on how the board falls. And offensive line-wise, I mean, obviously, we won't skip over Ricard. Ricard's spot's fine. I mean, what he does, they're not going to bring in somebody to replace him. I think he's solid and really good at what he does, and I think they're going to stick with him. And then you've got your offensive line. You got 5 solid starters. I think they could bring in somebody to push Rosengarten there on the right side, but we need some depth. Obviously, we're looking a little thin in the depth department, but obviously, offensive line is going to be a key to target at some point in the draft. I know in preparing for this video, looking at a lot of the mock drafts, you're seeing early round, the Tyler Bookers, Donovan Jacksons of the world. I've seen defensive guys as well. I've seen Malachi Starks be targeted. So offensive line seems to be a need for a lot of the pundits as they mock to this team. But then we'll see what we can do. It really depends on how that board falls out as to what we target. On the defensive side, we've got solid starters across the board. I really have no concern outside of, I would love to see Ojabo or Owe push Robinson. I think you're solid at your other 3 positions there in the middle, but I would love to see somebody push Robinson, and maybe it's even Adisa Isaac. He's a guy I liked coming out last year. And then in the secondary, could they bring in another safety to fight to play alongside Hamilton? Absolutely. Malachi Starks has been mocked in more than one draft of them, so that could certainly be something that is considered. And cornerback depth. Obviously, I think we have 2 solid starters and a really good nickel, but outside of that, we need some depth. And then do we look at kicker, punt, or something down the road? Probably not, but it's certain to be in consideration. We don't know what's going on with Tucker here. So with that, let's get over to this mock draft. On the clock at pick 27, and like I said, we're going BPA. We're looking for my favorite players that I think fit what Baltimore is going to try to do. Let's look up and down this board and let's see what we got here. So we've got Abuka, we've got Jalen Walker. Gray Zabel's a guy who's one of my favorite offensive linemen in this draft class. Derek Harmon's a guy that's been getting mocked to them a ton. Could look at Darius Alexander. He's a guy that's been flying up draft boards. Connerly has shown out well in this process. I mean, we're probably going to be looking. I like Trey Amos and Hairston and even Siobhan Revel. Nick Immonwuri is a guy that I believe is going to be in the first round. I think he's a really high-end talent. He's got elite athleticism. I think he would definitely be in play. I've been really kind of shooting for him to go to Washington. I think he definitely fits Washington's scheme really well. So we're just gonna look up here at the top, and we're gonna go Derek Harmon from Oregon. Harmon is extremely athletic. He's powerful. He's got great hands on the defensive line. I think he's one of those guys that he really will push for early playing time. Whether or not he's able to carve out a role early, I think he has the ability to. And in this defensive scheme, he could be a guy that attacks. He could be a guy that helps defend the run. I mean, there's really nothing that I dislike about Harmon's game in terms of what the Ravens could use him for. He's probably more on the outside, mostly because they look for bigger, weight-wise type defensive tackles or nose tackles. So could I see him probably starting on the outside? Potentially. But I love him. I think he'd be a great fit in Baltimore. On the clock at pick 59, it's one of those things where DB feels like the pick here just because of who's on the board. Donovan Jackson would be the other piece here that I'm looking at. So I like Revel. I like Thomas. I like Benjamin Morrison. I like Donovan Jackson. I think we're going to lean trenches here just because I think we can get DB in the next round. I think with the amount of picks they have, I think your high-end offensive lineman will go quicker than some of these DBs. So I'm going to go Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. And the great thing about Jackson is if you watched any of the times that he played Michigan, he did really well holding up against some elite level talent. I think he could be a guy that would push for startable reps on the right side. I think he could push Rosengarten for early playing time. And if not, he could be a guy that you could rotate around as an interior guy just because of his size, his physicality. I really like what he brings to the table. On to pick 91, we are now at the point in the draft where I think we've got DB is kind of where I've got my sights set. They could look, and again, this is a team that really can do whatever they want. They've got talent across the board. If they went with, even like a luxury pick, like Harold Fannin here would be great. Another athletic tight end, kind of in the Isaiah Likely mold. Is that what they want to do? Just line up a couple athletic tight ends to go with these great receivers that they've got? They could. Dorian Strong, long physical corner. I'm targeting DB here in this section just because I think that those are probably more of a pressing need. So at this point on the draft, we've got, Lathan Ransom, Makuba, Castro, Dorian Strong. Jonas Sanker's a guy I like a lot. He's a guy that's been slowly but surely climbing up draft boards. I think any one of those guys could be in play here. Just because we aren't as deep at corner, I think, in my opinion, I'm going to go Dorian Strong from Virginia Tech. And the thing I like about Strong is he's got the size. He's over 6 foot. He's got the speed. He's a very fluid athlete. He's got good ball skills. I think he's probably better in coverage. I like this player a lot as a guy who could step in and be depth from day one, that could push to be a starter in time. All right, on the clock at pick 129, and this feels like the sweet spot to grab one of these running backs while we've still got some really quality talent on the board. I'm going Jaden Blue from Texas. He's a guy that I haven't really talked about a ton on these videos, and there isn't really a good reason why. I think he's a really talented tight end. He's right around 6 foot. He's got the speed. This guy can get to his fastest speed very quickly. He's kind of an in-between what Baltimore has now. Now, obviously, Derrick Henry's big and physical, and then they've got smaller guys in Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell who are fast. Blue's kind of the mix of both. He's big, not necessarily as physical, because nobody is as physical as Derrick Henry, but then he's blazing fast. So he's kind of that nice mashup of both. And I think in this offense, that could be really big for them long term. All right, back on the clock at pick 136. And I'm going to take a guy that I have definitely not talked about in any of my mock drafts, but I think he's an interesting fit for a team like Baltimore. And that's Savion Jones from LSU, the edge rusher. He's big. He's like 6'6". He's right around 280. This guy's got a burst to him, but enough strength to, I think, get the job done. But he's one of those interesting prospects that in a Baltimore type defense, does he stand up? Does he have his hand in the dirt? How do you play him? I think he's kind of a chess piece that could be a really fun depth defensive line piece that could stand up if need be. I think he's got enough athletic ability to kind of do either. And B, at 136, this is a spot that I'm perfectly fine going after a guy like this. All right, back on the clock at pick 176, and we're going to pull the trigger on a safety here, but not the one that you would expect. There's quite a few here on the board. I'm going R.J. Mickens from Clemson. So this is a guy who I think has a really high football IQ. You can tell when watching his film that he processes and makes reads very quickly. I think he's got a lot of speed and athletic ability to kind of cover sideline to sideline if need be in the secondary. And I think he's one of those guys that you could see be a really solid special teamer early that could turn into a guy that pushes for playing time down the road. And for a team like Baltimore, he would be really fun to put next to Kyle Hamilton because, Kyle Hamilton coming in the league, people were concerned about some of that athletic profile. Well, you have the opposite here. He's got a really strong athletic profile, a little undersized maybe, right over 6 foot, but I think he fits what they do really well, and I'd be excited to see him in their defense. Back on the clock at pick 183, and we're going to pull the trigger on a tight end here. And before I go into my tight end, I first want to say they have so many picks that this is a team that I'm almost guaranteeing moves around in the draft, packages up some of these picks, because they're a team that obviously can grab as many pieces as they want, absolutely, if they want to stay and pick, but I just don't see it. I think they're going to move around and really play this board to grab their guys. But in this draft, I'm not making trades, so I'm just making the picks. And with that being said, at 183, we're going Jalen Conyers from Texas Tech. He's a receiving tight end, and I think he's a really interesting receiving tight end. Got good hands, got good ball skills. I think you could put him in a situation where, you've got Andrews, you've got Likely, you've even got Kohler, and then you've got a guy like Conyers who can learn from those players and over time really step in to be one of your receiving tight ends that you can flex out and do some different things with. I think that makes it for a really fun mismatch situation because he's big too. He's well over 6. He's 6'6", and that's going to be hard for DBs to cover. Back on the clock at pick 203, and we're going to be double dipping in receiver as we get later in the draft. I think this is the perfect time to grab some of these developmental pieces, and we're going to start with Keandre Lambert-Smith from Auburn. Guy's super fast. He's a deep ball threat. I think he's a guy that's going to take some time to develop, but he can be one of those guys that takes the top off the defense if you need kind of a big player. You need somebody to really take them DBs back. This is a guy that I would look at, especially for a team like Baltimore. They like some of those speed pieces. They've used those over the years in really fun trick plays that I think could be a mismatch nightmare. Back on the clock at pick 210, we're going to double dip, like I said, and grab another receiver. And we're going to grab, may not be high on their board, but it's a guy I really like in Brew McCoy from Tennessee. We've seen him at a few places in his collegiate career, but he gives me Rashad Bateman type vibes in terms of as a receiver. So he's bigger, taller receiver, great hands. He's kind of a yak guy in my mind. I think he does a lot of what they could do or what they do with Rashad Bateman, but he's bigger. So I think it's really interesting to see what a player like this could do as a depth guy that could step in case of injury. All right, back on the clock at pick 212, we're going to grab a developmental quarterback here, but I'm not grabbing one that you would expect in like KJ Jefferson or Will Rogers. We're going Donovan Smith from Houston. He's, I'm not going to say Lamar Jackson light, but he's got that physical tool set and that body type that a guy like Lamar has. 6'5", he's got plus athletic ability. I think he can make all the throws. I think there are times you see him throw with anticipation and touch. So could you use him as a depth piece, as a guy to kind of be the scout team Lamar Jackson quarterback? Sure. I think he definitely is a player that, that they don't have as a depth piece on their roster. None of what they've got can do what a guy like Donovan Smith can do. So why not let him be your depth piece and learn behind Lamar? All right, on the clock, pick 243. Last pick, we're looking interior offensive line just to add another depth piece to that offensive line. I'm going to look Joshua Gray, Oregon State. Maybe not as athletic as some of their other interior guys they've got now, but he's physical. He's got burst. He's strong hands. I think he's a guy that could be a nice depth piece for this offense. And that is it. So we got your defensive line, offensive line, corner, halfback, edge, safety, tight end, wide receiver, and a partridge in a pear tree. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. What would you do differently? Who are you targeting for your Baltimore Ravens? And we'll see you later.